Edwin. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to April's Multimodal Monday edition. I'm joined by Edwin Vandeveld, out of the Netherlands to tell us a little bit about TOMP-API, which is something I recently learned about, and I've been in the MaaS world, I feel, for the last 11 years. So with that said, Edwin, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit and the TOMP-API first.
Okay, thank you first of all for being here. And I'm glad to introduce myself. I'm Edwin Vandeveld. I'm software architect in the Netherlands, where I'm actually involved in the 7 MaaS pilots in the Netherlands, aimed for a national coverage using MaaS. So not only in cities or in regions, but covering all the Netherlands and make people roam from one city to another one. And one of the main things that is needed for that is interoperability. Interoperability between transport operators, as we call them, and MaaS providers. How do they interact with each other on a standardized way? So it's very easy to connect to a new transport operator you don't know yet. And this interoperability was achieved with the implementation of the TOMP-API. And that's a technical specification of how transport operators and MaaS providers are interacting with each other. And yeah, that's a bit in a higher level description. What is doing the TOMP-API? Because it's giving information just like GBFS and GTFS. There's well-known standards, and actually we incorporated GBFS for multimodality, for all modalities actually, and on top of it we created new layers, and a layer for booking and for trip execution, but also for the payment and support, and those things are standardized now. And in the Europe we have about 70 different organizations that are currently working on it, but we are aware we are not seeing everyone, because there are also quite a few organizations who are building the TOMP-API without our knowledge.
So maybe this last little bit, and I just want to highlight this for everyone. It sounds to me like TOMP-API is an open standard that anybody that wants to use it could use it. Is that correct?
Completely correct. It's actually an open source community, and there are about 25 companies actively involved in designing and discussing how everything should be done, and about 15 persons who are actually directly involved in the API itself on a technical way, but also persons who are more involved in connecting to other organizations like SEN and NetEx in Europe, but also in mobility data here in America. And there are also a specific group of people who are really into dissemination, spreading the word. So yeah, we're very not only technical guys. We also take things in as respect for the financials or juristic parts, or legal stuff. Everything is in scope in there, just to create the best API for transport operators and MaaS providers. Transport operator, MaaS provider, TOMP.
Yeah. I do want to pick up on another thing that you kind of quickly mentioned, and you just mentioned mobility data now as well. So on my side of the Atlantic, it right now looks like everybody is starting to develop standards for different things, right? We have GBFS, we have GTFS, we've had those for years, so that's nothing new. We have MDS all of a sudden, which is all the micromobility providers are using that standard. And now, and I'm playing as if this was something similar, but now I also have TOMP-API. So help us all understand how this puzzle fits together.
Okay. Therefore, I think I have to refer to a specific research. It's from Sweden, where it's depicted or distinguished 5 levels of MaaS maturity. Level 1, of 0, there's nothing. Level 1, there's provisioning of information. Where you are, what's your planning, your schedule, what's your where are your stations? All these things are in level 1. And in level 1 there is GBFS providing static information and the availability, and GTFS doing things on networks and schedules. This is just providing information. One level above this is the operational level. So that means there's a way to really book on a standardized way and to really travel on a standardized way. This means that there's only one way of opening an asset, and it doesn't depend anymore if it's a bike containing a Bluetooth lock or a ticket to get access to a train. Whatever, all these things that can be standardized in several levels, and level 3 is about bundling, and level 4 is more on a national or international level, the Green Deal, etc. Just the real big goals you want to achieve for MaaS. So, as I said, so the level 1 is GBFS and GTFS, and also NetText and Siri in Europe. And the TOMP-API is actually also part of the level 1, but also a big part of it is in level 2, because it does the real operations and has standardized it. Of course, the implementation is different for a bike operator and a taxi operator or a shared car, but the interface is the same, and that is the big advantage, because a MaaS provider, for a MaaS provider, it doesn't care anymore if it's a transport a bike or a train he's booking. Of course, there are a few different aspects in it, but the complete flow and all the endpoints you have to call are the same. And that's why that's the distinguishing between level 1 GTFS and GBFS. TOMP is in level 1, and the other one you mentioned is MDS. But MDS is not between transport operators and MaaS providers, because it's from transport operators to cities. It gives information to cities, and cities can analyze this data to maintain or whatever. But this is for a different purpose.
I understand.
Yes? Okay.
Now, we talked about the cities, we talked about the MaaS providers, we talked about the transportation operators or transport operators. Now, the big piece that I'm like, well, MaaS is supposed to be all about the user.
Yeah.
So how does that person fit in all of this?
Yeah, this is a big piece of the puzzle, because if you want to have someone traveling from A to B using multiple modalities, you have to exchange somehow user information. And of course, the end user is not very keen on it, that his information is spread over the world and stored everywhere. Therefore, we rely actually on an initiative that's called My Data. And My Data is thinking about the concept of different personal stores. That means you have a personal store vault where your own data is in, and you are in full control of it. You can give only consent to persons or organizations who are allowed to get this information. So you are you have the ability actually to say to a transport operator, yes, you can get my driver license. To a MaaS provider, you say, you shouldn't have this information, because why? What's the need? So all these things can be distinguished and in full control of the end user. That makes it also possible to use it outside the mobility context. So if there's your home address and you move, then you have to only to register in your vault your movement from your new address to your new address. And if someone needs your address and you give consent to it, it gets always your new address, and you don't have to supply to a lot of organizations. That's another thing that is in mind of my data. And the TOMP API is fully compliant with this setup. So we are able to connect to the vault, and you're giving a user key. And that means if a MaaS provider has only to store where is your vault and what's your key, and hand it over to a transport operator, and transport operator can get this information from this vault by himself and gets only the data the end user gives him.
So ultimately, what what I'm hearing you say, which me as a person, Sandra, likes to hear, is I would have control over who gets to see my data. So it's not a risk of like somebody else or all these other organizations have all my data. It's me, and I can essentially remove a key if I'm like, I don't know, I don't like you anymore, or I moved to a different country. I can just remove it, and I don't have to worry about deleting accounts, etc. It's
No,
just removing the access to my personal data. Is that correct?
revoke your consent. Hey, I gave this organization the permittance of the access to my information, and this piece of information I retract it now because it doesn't need it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
You keep in full control. Yes.
Yeah. Now, my example of me moving to a different country kind of leads to the last piece, which you mentioned at the beginning. I was one of the objectives, obviously, in this in the Dutch pilots, is this interoperability. But obviously, this is even more. Well, right now we're not traveling much, but once we travel again, obviously, it becomes more attractive if we go to different countries. So how? Obviously, that's where it started. And part of me is thinking is it the same idea as like cell phone roaming? Like I go into a different country, or like help us frame that piece a little bit
Yeah.
better.
It has similarities, but a cell phone, of course, is very the product is very similar. If you make a call in Europe or in Asia or in America, it's a cell phone call. Now, of course, there can be a little bit difference in the pricing, in the tariff, but the product stays the same. To do this, in mobility, there's a completely different world, because a bike is not a train, and a train is not a plane. So roaming doesn't only needs information about this is my, what's the word in PIN code or something, in or a unique number in a mobile. No, it's about your person. Do you have driver license? What's your age? All personal aspects, and it's totally different from the actually simple. I don't want to harm anyone, but simple roaming from mobile phones. So there are similarities, but in MaaS it's way more complex.
Yes, and I was just going to pick up on the complexity. I think you and I both have been in the space for a while. It's a very complex system, ecosystem, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have all these different modes which operate differently. You have all these different organizations who operate differently, have different pricing structures, have different countries have different legal requirements and privacy requirements. So just to be maybe, I don't know, not to dampen anyone's excitement about mobility as a service in MaaS, but just to be realistic, like what does it take for, this ecosystem, this very fragmented and complex structure to get somewhere where, something like TOMP-API can be like essentially the universal language that helps translate. I don't know what it takes. What do you think it takes?
I think I would be very optimistic if I would say could be able to travel using MaaS throughout Europe in 2025. That's absolutely not realistic, I think. I think there are quite a few islands, as I call them, cities or regions, or maybe even complete countries who are covered. But the real interoperability to travel from a country somewhere else on this planet, maybe even to Moon, Yeah, I think in if I 2030, I'm yeah,
And
10
what do
years,
you
20.
think it needs? Obviously, it needs the standard language, right? And then you mentioned at the beginning, you obviously have team members that also focus on making sure that other people know about it. But what
Yeah.
else does it need to get there? Let's say we aim for 2030. What do we need?
Actually, cooperation. And I think there are a lot of companies who are MaaS platform or MaaS providers, and they're now really focusing on their own island. And I think the biggest step forward would be if those islands are talking the same language between each other. So a person can travel from island A to island B. And of course, there are quite a few issues to tackle. But the technical part, I'm convinced of it can be done way before 2025. But yeah, there are politicals and juristic and legal stuff that makes it really hard. And there are actually, in my opinion, two things that are really needed to create an ecosystem. And first thing is, as I already mentioned, is the personal data store, the Vault ID, where the Vault can be referenced from anywhere in the world. So if your Vault is in America and mine is in Europe, it shouldn't matter because the transport operator in America knows this is a URL from a European Vault, and this is the key. I can access it. So that's one part. But the other part we didn't mention yet is the discovery service, uh, the yellow pages. Who
Mm,
is acting where? If I'm a MaaS provider in the Netherlands and I want to travel someone to Paris, I don't know who is there.
right.
What are the transport operators over there? So I have to look it up somewhere, and that's something that's completely missing at this moment. So one thing, the personal data stores, and second thing is the discovery service, and the third one that is a little bit lower in priority, but um, because it can be done on bilateral agreements nowadays, is the payment. Those three aspects
Mm,
are, from a technical point of view, the first hurdles to take.
okay. Well, Edwin, I really appreciate you taking the time and
Okay.
essentially educating. I know a lot of our viewers on TOMP API and kind of how this all plays together and what maybe the bigger vision should be for all of us that work in the
Mm-hmm.
MaaS ecosystem.